The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, tucked into Emma's backpack between a spelling test and a permission slip for the class field trip. "Daddy, look! Madison invited me to her birthday party." James Mitchell had smiled at his daughter's excitement, then felt that smile freeze when he read the location: Pinehurst Country Club. The same country club his grandfather had helped build 70 years ago. The same country club his father had been a member of until the money ran out and the membership lapsed. The same country club James hadn't set foot in since he was 12 years old. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he'd said, keeping his voice steady. "We'll make sure you get there." Now, standing in the parking lot surrounded by Mercedes and BMWs, and one particularly ostentatious Bentley, James wondered if he'd made a mistake. His pickup truck, clean but clearly well used, looked about as out of place as he felt, but Emma was bouncing in her seat, her pink party dress freshly ironed, her curly brown hair done up in the pigtails she'd specifically requested. She'd been talking about this party for weeks. Madison was her best friend, the one who defended her when other kids made fun of her for not having a mom, the one who shared her lunch when James forgot to pack one during his busy weeks. He wasn't going to let his own discomfort ruin this for her. "Ready, princess?" "Ready, Daddy." They walked hand in hand toward the entrance, Emma skipping with every other step. James kept his eyes forward, his shoulders back, his face neutral. He was just a father dropping his daughter off at a birthday party. Nothing more. The lobby hit him with a wave of memory so strong it nearly stopped him in his tracks. The marble floors, the crystal chandeliers, the massive stone fireplace with the carved names above it. Everything was exactly as he remembered from childhood visits with his father, back when the Mitchell name still meant something in this town, back when his grandfather's legacy was more than just a fading memory. If you're watching this video, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next is the most satisfying karma I've ever had the privilege of sharing. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind the reception desk, where a young woman in a crisp blazer was looking at him with barely concealed suspicion. "I'm just dropping my daughter off for the Madison Wells birthday party." "I see." The receptionist's eyes traveled from his work boots to his khaki pants to his simple polo shirt. Her expression said everything her words didn't. "And you are?" "James Mitchell. This is Emma." "Hi." Emma waved enthusiastically at the receptionist, oblivious to the tension. "One moment, please." The receptionist picked up a phone and spoke in low tones, her eyes never leaving James. He stood there, holding Emma's hand, feeling the weight of every glance from the members passing through the lobby. A woman in tennis whites gave him a wide berth, as if poverty might be contagious. An elderly man in a blazer paused to stare openly before shaking his head and walking on. James had known this would happen. He'd known it, and he'd come anyway, because his daughter's happiness mattered more than his pride. "Mr. Mitchell." A new voice now. James turned to see a tall blonde woman approaching, her designer suit probably worth more than his monthly mortgage payment. Her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes, all politeness, no warmth. "I'm Victoria Ashworth, the club manager. There seems to be some confusion." "No confusion. My daughter was invited to the Wells birthday party. I'm just dropping her off." Victoria's smile tightened. "Yes, well, we have certain protocols for non-members entering the premises. Perhaps you could wait outside while we escort your daughter to the party." Emma's hand tightened in his. "Daddy, I want you to walk me." "I understand," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But the rules are quite clear. This is a private club, and we must maintain certain standards." James felt the old familiar anger rising in his chest, the anger he'd learned to control years ago, the anger that came from being judged for things that didn't matter. He pushed it down and spoke calmly. "Ma'am, With respect, I'm not trying to become a member. I just want to walk my daughter to her friend's birthday party. It'll take 5 minutes. I'm afraid that's not possible. Then I'll wait here while she walks herself. Emma, do you remember how to get to the garden pavilion? Emma nodded, but her lower lip was trembling. She didn't want to go alone. She'd been so excited about showing him where the party was, about introducing him to her friend's parents, about having him see her in her fancy dress, in the fancy place. Victoria Ashworth saw the trembling lip and smiled. Perhaps it would be best if you simply left. We can have a staff member escort the child. Something shifted in the lobby. The ambient noise dimmed as people turned to watch. James could feel the eyes on him, dozens of them, all waiting to see how this would play out. The troublemaker in the work boots versus the elegant club manager. Nobody had any doubt who would win. Robert. Victoria gestured, and a large security guard appeared from somewhere behind James. The man was built like a linebacker, his expression professionally blank. Please escort Mr. Mitchell to the exit. Ma'am, James started. Now. The security guard's hand closed around James's upper arm, not painful, but firm. Final. The kind of grip that said this conversation was over. Daddy? Emma's voice was small now, scared. It's okay, sweetheart. I'll just wait outside. You go have fun at the party, okay? But Daddy, it's okay, I promise. Robert began walking James toward the door. The lobby was silent now, every member watching the show. James could see the satisfaction on their faces, another interloper dealt with, another reminder of who belonged here and who didn't. They were almost to the door when a voice rang out across the marble. Wait, stop right there. Harrison Wells had been having a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, golf in the morning, lunch with the investment committee, and now he was supposed to be reviewing the quarterly financials in his office. But something had drawn him to the lobby instead. A commotion, raised voices, the sound of his granddaughter's name being mentioned. What he saw when he arrived stopped him cold. A man in work clothes being marched toward the exit by Robert. A little girl in a pink dress crying silently as she watched her father being thrown out. And Victoria Ashworth standing there with that smug smile she always wore when she was putting someone in their place. But it wasn't Victoria or the crying child that made Harrison's heart skip a beat. It was the man's face. He knew that face. He'd seen it in photographs all his life, hanging in the club's historical gallery, carved into the cornerstone of this very building. He'd seen it at board meetings and charity galas and Christmas parties, back when the Mitchell family had been one of the pillars of this community. That face belonged to Charles Mitchell, the man who'd built this club from nothing, the man who'd convinced Harrison's own father to invest in a dream, the man whose vision had created the very walls that now surrounded them. And unless Harrison was very much mistaken, the man currently being thrown out was Charles Mitchell's grandson. Wait, stop right there. His voice carried across the marble like a thunderclap. Robert froze. Victoria's smile faltered. Everyone turned to look at the old man in the three-piece suit who just interrupted the proceedings. Mr. Wells, Victoria said smoothly, this is just a small security matter, nothing to concern yourself with. Who is this man? A trespasser who... I wasn't asking you, Victoria. I was asking him. Harrison walked across the lobby, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble his friend Charles Mitchell had personally selected 68 years ago. He stopped in front of the man in work clothes and looked into those familiar eyes. Your name, son? James Mitchell, sir. And your father's name? William Mitchell. And his father? James paused. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Charles Mitchell, sir. A murmur rippled through the lobby. Harrison saw confusion on some faces, dawning recognition on others. Victoria Ashworth had gone very pale. "Mr. Wells, I don't understand what this has to do with—" "Victoria, do you know why this club exists?" "Sir? Do you know why you have a job here? Why any of us have memberships? Why this building is standing at all?" Victoria's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Because 70 years ago, a man named Charles Mitchell had a vision. He was a carpenter by trade, came from nothing, built everything with his own 2 hands. He convinced 12 other men to invest in his dream of creating a place where the community could gather, where families could build memories, where hard work and integrity mattered more than old money and new pretensions." Harrison turned to face the gathered members, his voice rising. "Charles Mitchell laid every foundation stone of this building himself. He designed the golf course. He planted the first trees in the garden, where my granddaughter is having her birthday party right now. His name is carved above that fireplace." He pointed, "and etched into the cornerstone outside, and written on the original charter that's hanging in my office." He turned back to James. "And you just threw his grandson out like he was garbage." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria Ashworth's career did not survive the afternoon. By evening, she'd been relieved of her position. By the following week, she'd left town entirely, her reputation in ruins. The board of directors, led by Harrison Wells, had made it clear that her behavior was not just unacceptable, but fundamentally contrary to everything the club was supposed to represent. "This place was built by working people," Harrison had said at the emergency board meeting. "Charles Mitchell was a carpenter. My father was a factory foreman. We didn't create this club to become what we hated. We created it to prove that character matters more than credentials." The security guard, Robert, had personally apologized to James 3 times. He'd been new, he explained, just following orders. He hadn't known. James had shaken his hand and told him not to worry about it. "You were doing your job, no hard feelings." But the real change came in the weeks that followed. The board voted unanimously to restore the Mitchell family membership, permanently, free of charge, as an acknowledgement of the debt the club owed to its founder's legacy. James had tried to refuse, but Harrison Wells wouldn't hear of it. "Your grandfather gave everything to build this place. The least we can do is make sure his family always has a home here." Emma became a regular at the club's youth programs. She learned to swim in the pool her great-great-grandfather had designed. She played tennis on courts he'd laid out himself. She made friends with children whose families had been members for generations, and nobody ever questioned whether she belonged. Because she did belong. She'd always belonged. It had just taken everyone else a while to remember. James Mitchell stood in the lobby of the Pinehurst Country Club, looking up at the fireplace where his grandfather's name was carved in stone. It was 6 months after the incident. 6 months since he'd been marched toward the door. 6 months since Harrison Wells had changed everything. Emma was upstairs at Madison's 2nd birthday party, the first having been something of a disaster, though Madison's family had apologized profusely. The club was busy with its usual weekend crowd, but the atmosphere was different now. People nodded to James as they passed. They smiled. They stopped to chat. Not because he'd intimidated them, not because he'd demanded respect, just because they'd been reminded of something they'd forgotten. "Penny, for your thoughts." James turned to find Harrison Wells standing beside him, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. "Just thinking about my grandfather, wondering what he'd make of all this. I knew Charles, you know. Not well, I was just a boy when he passed. But I remember him. Strong hands, kind eyes, never raised his voice, but everyone listened when he spoke." James smiled. "That's what my dad always said. Said he could walk into a room full of bankers and politicians, and within 10 minutes, they'd all be asking his opinion. It's a gift. The ability to command respect without demanding it. Harrison handed James one of the glasses. "You have it too, you know. The way you handled Victoria, most men would have lost their temper, would have made a scene. You just stood there. Let the truth speak for itself. My grandfather used to say that anger is like fire, useful in small amounts, dangerous in large ones." Wise man. They stood in comfortable silence, looking up at the carved names. "I want you to know," Harrison said finally, "that what happened that day, it changed things. Not just for you, but for the club. We've been doing a lot of soul-searching, asking ourselves if we've become the thing Charles Mitchell was trying to build an alternative to. And the answer, uncomfortably, is yes. But we're working on it. New scholarship programs for kids from working families, community events open to the public, a fund to support local businesses." He smiled ruefully. "Your grandfather would probably say we're 60 years late, but better late than never. He'd say you're on the right track. That's what mattered to him, not where you started, but which direction you were moving." Another wise saying? Something my dad told me. Said his father believed everyone deserved a second chance, as long as they were willing to do the work. Harrison nodded slowly. "Then I suppose we'd better get to work." James still drove his pickup truck to the club. He still wore his work boots when he came to pick up Emma from swimming lessons. He still had calluses on his hands and dirt under his fingernails on days when he came straight from job sites. The difference was that now nobody looked twice. Or rather, they did look, but not with judgment, with respect, with recognition of the fact that a man's worth isn't measured by the cost of his shoes or the year of his car, but by the content of his character and the strength of his family. The Mitchells had been founding members of the Pinehurst Country Club, and now, 3 generations later, they were founding members once again. Some legacies skip a generation, some get lost and found, some have to be fought for, defended, reclaimed. But the ones that matter, the ones built on integrity and hard work and love, those legacies never really die. They just wait for the right moment to remind everyone what they forgot. James Mitchell looked around the club his grandfather had built, watched his daughter splash happily in the pool his great-grandfather had designed, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was home. If you're a single parent watching this, struggling to give your kids the experiences other families take for granted, remember this. Your worth isn't determined by what you can afford. It's determined by who you are and how you love your children. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world gets reminded of that in the most satisfying way possible. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of humble heroes and instant karma. And drop a comment telling us about a time when someone underestimated you and lived to regret it. Until next time, remember, real legacy isn't about money, it's about character. James had dreamed about the country club before, in the years after his father died and the family money ran out. In those dreams, he was always walking through the lobby in the clothes he actually wore. Work boots, khaki pants, the same polo shirt he'd owned for years. And in those dreams, everyone stared at him, the way they'd stared at his father in those final years, when the Mitchell name had stopped meaning wealth and started meaning failure. His father, William Mitchell, had been a good man who'd made bad decisions. Or maybe he'd been a bad businessman who'd made good decisions that just didn't work out. Either way, the Mitchell family fortune, built by James's grandfather Charles through decades of hard work and careful investment, had evaporated in less than 10 years. The country club membership had been one of the last things to go. James remembered the day his father came home and sat at the kitchen table and told his mother that they couldn't afford the dues anymore, that they'd have to let the membership lapse, that the club Charles Mitchell had helped build would no longer welcome his descendants. James had been 12 years old. He'd understood that something important was ending, even if he couldn't fully grasp what. Now, 25 years later, he was walking into that same club to pick up his daughter from a birthday party, and everything he'd dreamed about was coming true. The stares, the whispers, the unspoken judgment of people who measured worth in dollars and status. But James had learned something in those 25 years. He'd learned that his grandfather's legacy wasn't about money or membership or social standing. It was about character, about building things that mattered, about treating people with dignity regardless of how much they had or didn't have. He'd tried to pass that lesson on to Emma. He hoped she'd remember it, even if the kids at this party didn't. The confrontation with Victoria Ashworth played out exactly as it would have in any of James's dreams. She appeared like a designer-suited phantom, all cold smiles and calculated condescension. Behind her, the receptionist watched with the expression of someone who'd seen this show before and always enjoyed the ending. "Mr. Mitchell, was it? I'm afraid there's been some confusion about our visitor protocols." "No confusion. My daughter is at the Wells birthday party. I'm here to pick her up." "Yes, well, that's the issue, isn't it? Parents who are not members are typically expected to wait in the parking lot. We find it simpler that way." "Simpler for whom?" Victoria's smile tightened by a fraction. "For everyone, Mr. Mitchell. Our members value their privacy. They come here to escape the complications of the outside world." James looked around the lobby, at the marble floors his grandfather had selected, the chandeliers his grandfather had imported, the fireplace his grandfather had designed. "Complications," she'd said, as if he were a complication, as if his presence somehow diminished this place that his family had created. "My daughter is 6 years old. She doesn't know how to navigate a building this size by herself. I'll walk her to the party entrance, make sure she's settled, and then I'll leave. It'll take 5 minutes." "I'm afraid that's not possible." "Why not?" "Because—" Victoria paused, clearly searching for a diplomatic way to say what she wanted to say. She failed. "Because this is a private club, Mr. Mitchell, and you are not a member." "So my daughter is welcome here, but I'm not." "Your daughter was invited by a member's family. That grants her certain temporary privileges. It doesn't grant you anything." The smile was gone now, replaced by something closer to annoyance. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. Security will escort you." She gestured, and Robert appeared. The moment Robert's hand closed around his arm, James felt something he hadn't felt in years. Anger. Not at Robert. The man was just doing his job. Not even at Victoria, really, though she was doing her best to deserve it. The anger was older than that, deeper than that. It was the anger of every time someone had looked at his work clothes and decided he was less than. Every time someone had heard the Mitchell name and assumed the family's fall from grace was somehow his fault. Every time he'd watched his daughter interact with kids whose parents had money and seen the way those parents looked at him. He pushed the anger down. He'd learned to do that years ago, learned that losing his temper never solved anything and usually made things worse. His father had taught him that lesson in the worst possible way during those final years when William Mitchell's anger had driven away friends and family and business partners until there was nothing left but debt and disappointment. James would not make his father's mistakes. "It's okay," he said to Emma, whose hand was still in his, whose eyes were filling with tears. "Daddy will wait outside. You go have fun at the party." "But I don't want to go without you." "I know, sweetheart, but this is Madison's special day, and she wants you there. I'll be right outside. I promise." "Why won't they let you come in?" How do you explain exclusion to a 6-year-old? How do you explain that some people think money makes them better, that clothes determine worth, that a building your great-great-grandfather built can somehow exclude his descendants? You don't. You just smile and promise everything will be okay. Sometimes grown-ups have rules that don't make sense, but it's not about me, okay? It's about you and Madison and the party. You go have the best time ever. Emma threw her arms around his neck. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Princess. He stood up, looked at Robert, and nodded. Let's go. They were halfway to the door when the voice rang out. Harrison Wells had been in the club's historical archive when his assistant found him. Sir, there's a situation in the lobby. Victoria is having someone removed, and why would I care about that? Because the man's name is Mitchell. James Mitchell. Harrison froze, his hand still on the document he'd been examining, a copy of the original club charter, signed by 12 founding members in 1951. The first signature on that document, written in strong, confident strokes, read, Charles F. Mitchell. Mitchell? Are you sure? That's what the receptionist said. He came to pick up his daughter from Madison's party. Victoria is having security escort him out. Harrison was moving before his assistant finished speaking. He was 73 years old, and he moved faster than he had in decades. He'd known Charles Mitchell. Not well. Harrison had been just a boy when Charles died, but he remembered the man, remembered his strong hands and kind eyes, remembered the way he treated everyone the same, whether they were bank presidents or janitors, remembered the stories his own father had told about the immigrant carpenter who'd had a vision and convinced 12 men to invest in it. Charles Mitchell had built this club, not figuratively, literally. He'd swung the hammers and laid the stones and installed the fixtures. He'd worked alongside hired laborers because he believed no man should ask another to do work he wasn't willing to do himself. And now his great-grandson was being thrown out like a vagrant, not on Harrison's watch. Wait, stop right there. The command cut through the lobby like a knife. Everyone froze, Robert with his hand on James's arm, Victoria with her satisfied smile, the members who'd been watching the spectacle unfold. Harrison Wells strode across the marble floor with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Mr. Wells. Victoria recovered first, her voice smooth as silk. This is just a small security matter. Nothing to concern. Tell me your name. Harrison wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at James, at the man's face, searching for something he remembered from old photographs. James Mitchell, sir. Your father? William Mitchell. And his father? Charles Mitchell. Harrison nodded slowly. There it was, the same jaw, the same calm eyes, the same quiet dignity that had made Charles Mitchell one of the most respected men this club had ever known. Do you know who this man is? Harrison asked Victoria, his voice deceptively mild. A non-member who... This man is the great-grandson of Charles Mitchell, the Charles Mitchell, the man whose name is carved above that fireplace. Harrison pointed, and etched into the cornerstone outside and written on the charter that's hanging in my office right now. The man who built this club with his own hands when your grandparents were still in diapers. Victoria's face went pale. I didn't... No, you didn't. You didn't ask, you didn't check, you didn't do anything except see a man in work clothes and decide he didn't belong. Harrison's voice was rising now, carrying through the lobby for everyone to hear. Charles Mitchell wore work clothes every day of his life. He believed that a man's worth wasn't measured by his tailor. He believed that character mattered more than credentials, that hard work mattered more than inherited wealth, that the way you treated people mattered more than the car you drove or the watch you wore. He turned to face the gathered members, many of whom were trying to pretend they hadn't been watching. This club was built on those values. It was built by a man who would have been disgusted by what just happened, and I, for one, am not going to stand here and watch his descendant be treated like a criminal for the crime of wearing work boots. Harrison turned back to James and extended his hand. On behalf of this club and everyone who's benefited from your grandfather's vision, I apologize. You're welcome here. You've always been welcome here, whether we remembered it or not." James shook his hand, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, sir. I just came to pick up my daughter." "And you'll do that. But first, there's someone you should meet. Your daughter's friend, Madison Wells, is my granddaughter, and I think it's time the Wells and Mitchell families got reacquainted." The party was winding down when they arrived, but Madison Wells insisted on introducing Emma's father to everyone. "This is Mr. Mitchell. His great-great-grandfather built our club. That makes Emma like club royalty." Emma beamed. James smiled. Harrison watched with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with club membership and everything to do with justice finally, belatedly being served. Later, after the cake and presents and the obligatory photographs, Harrison pulled James aside. "I meant what I said in there. You're welcome here. We'll restore your family's membership, waive any fees. It's the least we can do. With respect, Mr. Wells, I don't want special treatment. That's not what my grandfather would have wanted either." "What would he have wanted?" James thought about it. He would have wanted this place to live up to its original purpose, to be a place where families could gather, where communities could build, where people were judged by their character rather than their bank accounts. "And you don't think we do that?" "I think you tried to throw me out because of the shoes I was wearing. That's not exactly character first." Harrison couldn't argue with that. Victoria will be dealt with. It's not about Victoria. She's a symptom, not the disease. The disease is the assumption that money equals worth, that status equals value. My grandfather spent his whole life fighting that assumption. I've spent my whole life living its consequences. What would you have us do?" James looked around the club, at the marble his grandfather had chosen, the chandeliers his grandfather had installed, the legacy his grandfather had built and his father had lost. Build something new. Scholarships for kids whose families can't afford membership. Community programs that bring in people who'd never set foot in here otherwise. Find ways to honor what this place was supposed to be, not just what it's become. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Charles Mitchell would be proud of you," he said finally. "You're more like him than you know." "I hope so. He's the only Mitchell whose legacy I want to carry." Victoria Ashworth was gone within the week. The official statement called it a voluntary resignation to pursue other opportunities. Everyone knew the truth, but more importantly, the club started to change. The scholarship program James had suggested launched within 3 months, funded by an anonymous donation that bore a suspicious resemblance to the investment income from the Mitchell Family Trust, a trust that had somehow survived the family's financial collapse and had been quietly growing for decades. The community outreach program followed 6 months later. Local families were invited to the club's facilities for everything from swimming lessons to wedding receptions, at prices adjusted for their income. The waiting list grew longer than the membership roster, and every year, on the anniversary of Charles Mitchell's founding, the club held a celebration, not just for members, for everyone. Former scholarship recipients came back to share their stories. Community program participants talked about what the club had meant to them, and at the center of it all was a simple display: work boots, similar to the ones Charles Mitchell had worn when he built this place, alongside a photograph of the man himself. "He'd hate being a symbol," James said to Harrison at one of these events, watching Emma, now 12, give a tour to a group of young scholarship students. "He just wanted to build things that mattered." "That's exactly what makes him worth symbolizing," Harrison replied. "Humility, hard work, treating everyone with dignity." He smiled. "The values you've passed on to your daughter, I notice." James watched Emma explain the history of the fireplace his grandfather had designed, that he'd almost been thrown out for standing near. "She's better than I am," he said. "She doesn't have any of the anger, any of the resentment. She just sees the good in things and wants to share it with everyone. That's not weakness, that's strength." "I know. It took me a long time to learn that. She seems to have been born knowing it." Emma caught his eye across the room and waved. He waved back. "The Mitchell legacy," Harrison said thoughtfully. "It skipped a generation, but it landed exactly where it was supposed to." "I like to think so." "Charles would be proud." James smiled. "I hope so. I really hope so." Years later, when Emma was grown and had children of her own, she would tell them the story of the day she went to Madison Wells's birthday party and her father was almost thrown out of the club. She would tell them about the security guard who grabbed her father's arm, about the woman in the expensive suit who sneered at his work boots, about the way everyone stared like he didn't belong, and then she would tell them about the elderly man who stopped everything, who pointed to the names carved in marble, who taught an entire roomful of wealthy people what real legacy looked like. "Your great-great-great-grandfather built that club," she would say. "He built it with his own hands because he believed that communities need gathering places, that families need traditions, that people need somewhere to belong." "Did they let Grandpa stay?" her children would ask. "They did more than that. They apologized. They restored our family's place. And your grandfather, he made them do something even more important. He made them remember why the club existed in the first place. Not for status or exclusivity or making people feel small. For community. For belonging. For building something that would outlast any individual fortune. Is that why we still go there? That's exactly why. Because it's ours. Not because we own it or control it or have some special claim to it, but because our family helped create it, and that means we have a responsibility to make sure it stays true to what it was supposed to be. What was it supposed to be? Emma would smile. The same smile her father had, the same smile her great-great-grandfather had, passed down through generations of Mitchells who understood something most people forgot. A place where everyone belongs. That's all any place is supposed to be, really. A place where everyone belongs. If you're watching this, and you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong somewhere, because of how you look, or what you wear, or how much money you have, remember James Mitchell. Remember that the people who judge you by those things are missing what actually matters. Character, integrity, the way you treat people. Those are the things that build legacies. Those are the things that last. Like and subscribe for more stories of humble heroes and instant karma. And drop a comment telling us about a time when someone underestimated you and found out they were wrong. Until next time. Real legacy isn't about money. It's about character. James Mitchell stood in the lobby of the Pinehurst Country Club, looking up at the fireplace where his grandfather's name was carved in stone. It was 6 months after the incident. 6 months since Harrison Wells had changed everything. Emma was at Madison's birthday party, her second invitation of the year. The atmosphere was different now. People nodded to James as they passed. They smiled. They stopped to chat. "Penny for your thoughts?" James turned to find Harrison Wells standing beside him. "Just thinking about my grandfather, wondering what he'd make of all this. I knew Charles. Not well. I was just a boy when he passed. But I remember him. Strong hands, kind eyes, never raised his voice, but everyone listened. My grandfather used to say that anger is like fire, useful in small amounts, dangerous in large ones." They stood in comfortable silence, looking up at the carved names. "I want you to know," Harrison said, "that what happened, it changed things. We're working on it. New scholarship programs, community events, a fund to support local businesses." He'd say you're on the right track. That's what mattered to him. Not where you started, but which direction you were moving. James still drove his pickup truck to the club, still wore his work boots, still had calluses on his hands. The difference was that now nobody looked twice with judgment. They looked with respect. The Mitchells had been founding members of the Pinehurst Country Club, and now, 3 generations later, they were founding members once again. Years later, when Emma was grown, she would tell her children the story of Madison Wells's birthday party and the day her father was almost thrown out. She would tell them about the security guard, the woman in the expensive suit, the way everyone stared like he didn't belong. And then she would tell them about the elderly man who stopped everything, who pointed to the names carved in marble, who taught an entire roomful of wealthy people what real legacy looked like. "Your great-great-great-grandfather built that club," she would say. "He built it with his own hands, because he believed that communities need gathering places, that families need traditions, that people need somewhere to belong." Did they let Grandpa stay? They did more than that. They apologized. They restored our family's place. And your grandfather made them remember why the club existed. Not for status or exclusivity, for community, for belonging. Emma would smile, the same smile her father had, passed down through generations of Mitchells. A place where everyone belongs. That's all any place is supposed to be. If you're watching this, and you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, remember James Mitchell. Remember that the people who judge you by what you wear or how much money you have are missing what actually matters. Character, integrity, the way you treat people. Those are the things that build legacies. Those are the things that last. Like and subscribe for more stories of humble heroes and instant karma. Drop a comment telling us about a time when someone underestimated you. Until next time, real legacy isn't about money. It's about character.